Well, changes to work requirements in the SNAP program. Good evening to you. I'm Jennifer Andrews. Kenya Ross joins us now with more on how that will affect some of the recipients. Kenya?
Yes, Jennifer. Beginning October 1st, the age limit for SNAP users classified as able-bodied adults without dependents, also known as ABODs, increased from 52 to 54.
New changes are in effect for work requirements and time limit waivers through the SNAP program. Changes went into effect Tuesday. The age limit for SNAP users identified as able-bodied adults without dependents went from 52 years old to 54 years old. SNAP recipients between the ages of 18 and 54 are classified as ABODs if they are physically or mentally fit for work and do not live with a child under the age of 18.
Before October 1st, the state has had waivers of this time limit. Sometimes it covered the whole state, and other periods of times it covered certain parishes. It's all based on a fairly complicated federal formula for determining that, and they look at unemployment rates and economic conditions.
According to the Department of Children and Family Services, these changes affected more than 20,000 people across the state as of August 31st. The agency also said time limit waivers in 33 parishes expired. 12 of those parishes are in Northeast Louisiana.
So SNAP recipients that meet the definition of ABOD and that were in one of these parishes that had a waiver will no longer have that waiver. So the time limit will apply to them. There are exceptions to that time limit. For example, if they're physically unable to work, if they're experiencing homelessness, if they're pregnant.
And on KNOE.com, you can find the contact information to verify if you qualify for an exemption. Jennifer?